Seches Beitsa, Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. In the middle of the page is a Mishnah, which we've already started. We'll review it again. Ein poch sinas haner. Rashi learns we're not allowed to hollow out a piece of clay to make it into what Chazal would call a ner, a container which would hold the shemen and the wick, etc. Why can't you do that? Mipnei shehu oise kli, because that is considered to be making a kli. Gemora will discuss that not everybody would accept that and call it a kli at that stage, but Gemora is going to attribute that to a particular Tana. Ve'ein oisin pechamim b'yom tov. You can't also make literally charcoal, but I think it means a wick that you'd want to singe the wick and make it easier to use. Can't do that. Ve'ein chotchin es ha'pasila. You also cannot cut a long wick down to size. All three ostensibly the same idea, but in varying degrees of chiddush, that you're making some kind of a kli, some kind of a vessel, a utensil by doing what you just did. That's why it's asur on Yom Tov.
Because you're making the kli, it's asur.
Right. Last halacha, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, choitcha b'ur. You are allowed to cut a wick down to size, but not with a knife, but rather using the flame itself to, like you hold the wick on either side of the flame, and right in the middle it burns, and it's a way of cutting the wick that ostensibly is a shinui. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda's matter. Although Rashi says the Gemora will explain, perhaps there's a better explanation in the Gemora. Let's see the Rashis and the Mishnah. Who would like to try to do the Rashis and the Mishnah?
Me.
Swirly.
Ein poitzchin is a ner. One cannot call out a container, right?
Right.
Little echad min ha-Beitsa.
Sorry, just a minute. Hello? Yeah. Good, Baruch Hashem, giving a share. How are you? I thought I saw him up in the shul. Does he keep it on during learning? Would he have it on during learning? Alright, just a second, I'll look it up. I don't know if the... Okay, again, Rashi says the pshat is little.
Little echad min ha-Beitsa shel yotze. To carve out one of the balls.
No, not to carve out, to take.
To take out.
No, to take. To pick up.
To take. To take one of the balls of clay shel yotze. Balls of clay.
Of the yotzer, of the
manufacturer.
The fellow who makes pottery.
Lach tov a grupo.
Litchov.
Litchov a grupo. And he would insert it into his fist.
Not into his fist, he'd insert his fist into it.
His fist into it, into it. The HaKodesh ner, carve out.
Right.
A container.
Right.
Cruzil belaz. Kruzil, it's a kli because Rosh says you're making a kli, that's why it's also.
Right. Yes, the Gemora will make it clear that the Chiddush is that even though you have not put it in the kiln yet, you haven't fired it up, and normally you wouldn't call it pottery before that or a finished product, but this person would still call it a finished product. Gemora will explain why is it a finished product just with wet clay.
Is that the Hebrew word for fist?
Word for what?
Fist. The Hebrew word for fist as well.
Fit is what?
Fist.
Oh, fist, a growth.
A growth.
Yeah, I think so. As I think I mentioned the other day, that when you hit someone with your fist, it's called natan lo agrofim. Although most things become Englishized, they just call it boxing now. Not nulo box. Yeah, I believe that's the Hebrew name. Agrov. Okay, so obviously you can carve it out however you want. I'm not sure why Rashi brought the example of a fist, but apparently that's the easiest way to make a hole in the wet clay. Is just insert your fist. And probably the cavity which is created by doing that is not the most refined cavity either. A bit crude, but it's still enough to be a container that can hold the shemen, and it can be used for some purpose now as a container, as a receptacle. Okay, so that's the first level. We can't do that. That's called making it into a kli. Therefore it's aser. Next Rashi, you want to try a Shabbatai?
Yes. Vain osim pat
Pechamim.
Pechtamim.
Pechamin.
Is that a
Pech.
is that a pech?
Yeah.
Huh?
Pechamim.
Chirik.
Vain osim pechamim. That you cannot make charcoal.
Mm-hmm.
The inu hu nami kli minu. Because these are considered klis, kalim.
Right.
It's
It's just a wick.
Yeah. It's a ref zahav
For those
refining, for those who refine gold.
Right.
Upitla
Petila.
nami kli. And the wick is considered, it's also considered a kli.
Yeah, I mean, he said it is a kli, now he's saying it's a kli as well. So he seems to be repeating himself.
Right.
So I think the first time he's not really talking necessarily about a patila, because then it would be repetitive. I think the first time he doesn't mention patila, he says they are also a kli for the people who make gold, who refine gold. It must be he's talking about charcoal itself. Maybe charcoal itself is a kli, is a thing which is utilizable for the people who refine gold. I don't know what part of the process you use charcoal to refine gold, but maybe there's some part of the process. So Rashi says even just making pechamim is called making a kli. That's the first step. They are a kli, the pechamim. It would also explain why it's plural. They. What's the they? As opposed to patila, the next sentence he talks about a patila is feminine, singular. So it seems like he's talking about two different things, and he wants us to hear both statements. Pechamim are a kli, just charcoal themselves would be a kli. Maybe like, I know when I grew up, we always used to use charcoal for a barbecue.
Yeah.
We always were happy when we could smell the charcoal burning. We knew we were going to get some good barbecued steaks. So perhaps that's the first step, just establishing that when you make a piece of charcoal, that's also making a kli. Who would use a piece of charcoal? People who want to cook something on an open fire. I guess the people, and that it reaches a certain intensity when you use charcoal that doesn't reach with normal wood. So perhaps that's what Rashi means. Pechamim are a kli for the people who refine gold, because for them, when they put that pot of gold on the fire, they need a very high, intense heat. And perhaps that's only created when you have a fire made out of charcoal, like we made a barbecue. There's a reason why they use charcoal. It's a certain kind of a flame which is created, which is maybe more even, and it's an intense, but it's not overly, hot. Whereas wood, if you get a nice flame, it's usually not that hot. The real heat in a flame is in the coals as well, when they break down into the coals or the embers. So maybe that's what he's trying to establish. They, charcoals, plural, pechamim, are a kli. For whom? For osei, for tzorfei zahav. And then he says, and also, it wouldn't make sense if the place where the charcoal is evidencing itself is in a patil, and that if that's not a kli, so then Rashi has to say both of them are a kli. Both charcoal by itself would be a kli if all you were making was charcoal. And here, where it's just a bit of a singeing on the end of a wick, it's also important to point out that the wick itself is a kli. So it's like you're doing both. You're refining the wick, which is a kli, and you're adding to it a bit of charcoal, which is a kli. Perhaps that's what Rashi's emphasizing. Both of them are a kli. So that's why, even though the tikkun is a very subtle and small tikkun, so maybe you wouldn't have thought it significant enough to make it forbidden on Yom Tov, maybe that's what Rashi's point is. There's two kind of tikkunim which are being wrought here. Both making of charcoal, a small little tiny piece at the end of the wick, and also you're refining the wick. And both of them are kalim of their own right. So you're basically doing a double tikkun on a very minor level, but because there's a double tikkun going on, that makes it worse. That makes it more of a tikkun altogether, and therefore that's why it's asur. That's the only way I can make sense out of this Rashi, otherwise he seems to be just repeating himself, and what's he talking about doesn't even make sense really. Because here he's talking in the plural, inhu, nami kli, ninhu, they are a kli, and he talks about people who refine gold, like to use a patil, to use a wick to refine gold. I was trying to think of when do you insert some kind of a wick into the process of refining gold. So that doesn't even make sense. Of course, I'm not an expert in refining gold. I don't even know if I've ever seen refining of gold in the process. Maybe refining of iron, like the big steel mills and stuff. They'll show pictures of how they originally used to do it in big cauldrons and so forth. But it would make sense if Rashi's saying the charcoal. The charcoals, first of all, pechamim is plural, so that would make sense why he's calling them inhu and ninhu. This is referring to the plural pechamim that he just talked about in the quote. And also, he says, L'tzorfei zahav, that I can understand. They use charcoal in refining gold, I guess, to create a high intensity, but manageable kind of flame. And then he turns to the pasila, and that's why he says nami. He used the word nami twice, in fact, if you think about it. Inhu nami klini, and then he says, pasila nami klihi. So it seems like he's trying to stress that you have two things which can be called a kli here. The pechamim which you're creating, that's called a creation of a kli on some level. If you're creating real charcoal, it certainly would be. And here, it's a bit of charcoal at the end of the wick, so that's a problem. But if a patil itself would not have been a kli, perhaps making it a better patil would not have been such a problem. With a tiny bit of pechamim at the end. So maybe that's what Rashi's driving at. And that's why he's actually stressing both this and that are a kli, and therefore altogether you're doing something significant enough to worry about on Yom Tov.
So this pacham is a kli?
That's what Rashi seems to be saying. How else do you interpret this sentence? After he quotes the Gemora that talks about pachamim, he says, Inhu nami kli ninhu. They are also a kli. What's the they? It seems like he's talking about pachamim. And then he seems to be bothered. Well, why would you call it a kli? Who's going to use a piece of charcoal? I mean, today, it became like a very big energy source, charcoal. So it's hard to imagine why Rashi would have to give you the example, but perhaps in their day they didn't really use charcoal very much. Maybe it was very sooty, so people didn't want to really use it in their houses for heating up their ovens. Perhaps it was like a drawback to using charcoal, whereas wood maybe was easier to access for sure, and easier to transport, easier to burn, maybe the smoke was more manageable as well. So people didn't use charcoal very much. So the only people who really were like professionally inclined and had special need for high intensity heat, which I assume to really refine gold properly, the very high intensity heat, like lahavdil when they bake matzahs. I don't know if either of you were ever baking matzahs. They throw huge logs in this huge oven, and they turn into these huge glowing red hot embers, and it really is hard to get close to that oven. I understand why the guys paid a lot of money, because it's extremely hot, and besides putting it into such an oven, taking them out of the oven is extremely difficult art. Because as he lays it out, he has to make sure also that it doesn't fold on itself, because anytime it folds on itself, you have a chashash chametz. Anyhow, so they have these really high intensity, glowing hot embers that are created by these special logs that they throw in. So I assume people also who refine gold, they need this high intensity heat, which apparently coals are very good at. Real coals, really big, proper coals, are good at creating such a high intensity heat. In any event, so I think that's a Rashi is for some reason telling us both of these things. Pechamim are a kli for whom? For tzorfei zahav. And a patil is also a kli for hadlaka. Okay.
Patil is a kli, right?
Yep, that's what he's saying. It's also a kli for hadlaka, for being able to light a proper flame, proper light, proper nair. Asiya. Tikkun.
And it's necessary to...
It needs, right? Either the hadlaka or the patila, either of them are feminine. So the hadlaka needs, or maybe the patila needs, a making has to be made,
needs repairing,
and tikkun, and making it better. Like, in other words, it needs to be made. At some point, you have to make it, and then it has to be improved upon. You want to do both things to your patila to get it ready to light. Okay. Excuse me. So, again, Rashi sort of clues us in on the problem that you're making. There could be a question of making a wick as well as fixing a wick. So it seems like when you make the pechamim, you're fixing it. When you actually cut it, you're making it. And the last Rashi, where he just explains Rabbi Yehuda's shita, that you can cut the wick down to size by using the flame itself. Chot chan. Chot. Not this chot chan, just chot chan. Ur.
Cutting with a flame.
Cutting it, or cutting them.
Flame. Gemora mefresh mai shina or ur. May.
Sakin.
I can explain what the difference between cutting or with a flame and a knife.
Right. Because we know that it's usher to cut with a knife. That's what the Tanna Kama said. It's usher to cut up a wick down to size. And we see that Rabbi Yehuda really agrees with that, because he's not saying to the Tanna Kama, you're wrong. He's just saying you can cut it with a different thing. So it means that he agrees with what it said, that it is wrong to cut with a knife. And he's just adding that, but if you do it with a different thing, a candle, a flame that's coming out of a candle, it's okay. So obviously that's going to need an explanation. Why? Why is it any better than cutting with a knife? Okay. Weiter. Says the Gemora.
Ma'an Tana de Brachot.
Pechitat.
Pechitaner Minehu.
Mana.
Mano. So, who's the Tana who describes the cutting?
No. Gouging out
gouging out the
clay
into a vessel, making a vessel.
Right. In other words, who would call it a kli at this point when it's just wet clay? Just gouging it out and making a wet clay cup, so to speak, a cup made out of wet clay. Who would call that making a kli? Because we see in our Mishnah, whoever wrote our Mishnah, what's his opinion?
Yeah.
It is a kli. That's what he actually says. You can't do it because it's making a kli.
What is the word for kli?
What is the word for kli in Aramaic? Correct. This spelling of mana with an aleph at the end. There's another type of mana which is with a hay on the end, which means a portion. That's more of a Hebrew word anyways. Okay, so, and then there's another word which is mina hanimili, or mina, right? Mina can mean from where. It's a different word. This is mana. And by the way, one of the good places to learn Aramaic is when you're standing by a chuppah, and they're reading off the kasuba, because that they will say a lot of these words. You'll hear the word mana thrown around over there, because that's part of what the man promises to give her, clothing and this and that. And of course, in the eyes of our sages, clothing is just another type of vessel. It's a utensil. Nice one, comfortable one, necessary one, but it's just another utensil after all is said and done. So you will hear a lot of these words. Very good to pay attention while this fellow's reading the kasuba, and everyone else is sort of tapping their feet, waiting for him to finish, as if, you know, what a bore, or what a waste of time. Well, for us, students of the Talmud, we should be appreciative that we had a crash course in Aramaic for like 5 minutes that we were like straining to listen to every word that this fellow said. Because eventually, if you go to enough chasanas, and you're standing there listening to this guy read off the kasuba enough, you can actually pick up quite a lot of Aramaic. Of course, it's the same idea as reading Shnai Mikra from Targum every week, which I would recommend highly. That you teach yourself a little bit of Aramaic every single time you use another few words of Unkelos in Aramaic. Right after you read 2 times the Hebrew, you start to realize the words are paralleling the Aramaic words to the Hebrew words. And it starts to stick. Eventually it sticks to the bean, to the wet noodle, to the slippery wet noodle.
To the inti.
Exactly.
To the wet inti.
Yeah, that's it. That hasn't been fired up yet. Okay, so here we go. Who would be the Tana, in other words, of our Mishnah, who would consider this measly cup made out of wet clay to be a kli, right? We said clay and clear, pretty similar words, and without it being fired up in the kiln. That's how we'll interpret the question at this point, even though there's more that we're adding than the actual words of the Gemora, but that's really what's the pshat. As we know, actually Rashi adds the bit that I just added. Let's see Rashi. Who's the Tana de pechisas ner manahu? That gouging out this chunk of clay, it would be called a mana.
Before you begin to
Fired it up.
Fire up into the furnace.
That's right. You see, Rashi makes that point. So what I said is actually part, according to Rashi, of the pshat of the Gemora. Who will be the Tana of this Mishnah who considers it a kli before it's fired up in the kiln, and it's just still a very sort of wet piece of clay, just with a receptacle. But who would use that as a kli? Who would consider that a kli? The answer is Amar Rav Yosef.
Amar Rav Yosef, Rabbi Meir.
It's Rebbe Meir. So funnily enough, if you think about it from a certain perspective, it's a bit strange. The previous Mishnah, we had a Tana Kama saying if a hole developed in the wall, then you can take the fruit out, it's not a problem of muksa. And then Rebbe Meir came along and said, you can even make a hole in the wall. And then Gemora explains in this special circumstance, whatever, what he meant, but he's there at the end of that Mishnah, and then the very next Mishnah is Rebbe Meir, according to that.
It's the same Rebbe Meir, right?
It's the same man, it's a completely different subject now. And the reason why we know it's Rebbe Meir is sort of for this special reason that the Gemora is using to show that it's Rebbe Meir. But at the end of the day, if we accept Reb Papa's pshat that it is Rebbe Meir, it's a bit strange. Or you could look at it as very good, actually. The previous Mishnah, Rebbe Meir said you're allowed to make a wall, but you're allowed to make a hole in the wall, but don't do the same thing to a piece of clay. Well, that would actually be very good. Think about it. Same verb. We pointed that out yesterday. Rabbi Meir says we are allowed to be poches the wall, but we're not allowed to be poches a piece of clay. That would actually be very good if it's like a continuation of the previous Mishnah. That would also explain why we don't mention Rabbi Meir's name here, because we don't have to. He just finished saying we are poches the wall, and then he has to say, but we're not poches this piece of clay. That would actually be very good. Well, we don't even have to mention his name. Why the same verb is used. I was bothered by that the other day. That would be very good, actually. But that's not the real reason for it's just a side benefit. So how does Reb Papa know this? How does he know? What are we looking for? A place where Rebbe Meir will say that when you make a kli, and it's only what?
It's only
a damp piece of clay still.
Yeah. It's not fully furnished.
Hasn't been fired up in the kiln.
It's considered a kli.
It's still considered a kli. So that's what we have to hopefully find. He's going to bring us an example of where Rebbe Meir says such a thing. Keep going.
Tanya.
Learned in a Beitsa.
Kli Harish.
Harris.
Not Harris. My imitai.
Me'ematai.
Makadel tomorrow. So Harris, clay, a kli of clay, or a clay kli. From when does it attract tuma?
Not attract, but it can receive tuma.
Okay.
Right now, it's basically saying cheres is really pottery. Like a countertop, by the way, is normally called charsina. I don't know if you've ever, or like the ceramic sinks as opposed to the stainless steel sinks, charsina. It's the same word, cheres, charsina. But in modern Hebrew, they sometimes call it charsina. But it's basically a certain level. It's like pottery. But when will a kli that's made, that's a pottery type of a kli, i.e., it's made with clay, when will it turn into a proper kli that's makabel tuma? The answer is
when its work is finished. When it's
right.
When it's been fired up.
No.
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 Oh.
No. The point is when malacha is finished. Malacha means work.
Final product.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily going to be enough. I think he's medayik with the words here, because malacha, if you think of malacha as all those 39 things that went into making the Mishkan, in a sense, each one does something creative to the object. It changes the object. That's what that's why Tosu says, by carrying an object, especially if you're carrying it just Daled Amos or Shusarabi, the fact that should be a malacha, Tosu says, is like a tremendous chiddush. Tosus explains, why does the Masechta Shabbos start with the malacha of hotzah, of taking something in and out of a domain or carrying it within the public domain? That's not in the list. If you get the list of 39 that is listed in the second parak of the seventh parak in the second Mishnah, right? That's where it lists all the 39 malachas. Hotzah is actually the last one. So why in the Masechta is it the first Mishnah? Started talking about hotzah. If the Ani's standing outside and the usher standing inside, and he passes him out, whatever, Could be Hotzah, the Mishnah says. So Tosas asks, why are you starting with this one? Start with one of the first ones in the list of the 39 malachas. Wouldn't that be a normal way to start with Masechah Shabbos? Start with the first malacha. Plowing, planting, whatever. Look at that Mishnah in 7th parak. So he says no, because it's the biggest chiddush, and Chazal are always interested in the biggest chiddush. Why is it the biggest chiddush? Why is Hotzah the biggest chiddush? Because there's no change in the object whatsoever, just changing location. Right? I take this cup and I walk outside with it and I put it down. Did the cup change at all? Did I improve the cup? Not really. Just I have a usage for it outside. I don't have that usage for it inside. So in a sense, I'm happy that it changed its location, but it hasn't changed the object. But a real malacha, you see from Tosos, he calls Hotzah malacha garua.
Weak malacha. It's
Not just weak, it's like kind of grade C, like grade.
We had the cases from Malilas, right? When they're considered, you take Tsama off that, then there's a complete finished malacha.
Yeah, well it's a little bit different, because they're talking about when it's normally going to be eaten, when do you want to start eating it. But here the word malacha, I think, is being used in the true sense of the word malacha, like in Shabbos, like we learned from in Parshas Vayakhel. When we learn the 39 malachas are whatever goes into creating the Mishnah, because each one is a creative act. And that's why he calls Hotzah malacha garua, because it's not really a creative act, you're just changing location of the object. It's a malacha garua, it's an inferior malacha, because it doesn't really change the object really at all, just the location. So you see the real term malacha should connotate what, according to Tosfos? Changing the object, changing the molecular structure of the object, changing the shape of the object, changing something about the object significantly. So that's why he's saying over here, when I'm working with a kli, when I do this to it, I would do that to it, I'm doing different things physically to it to change it into a slightly different object, gouging it out, doing this, shaping it, doing all that kind of stuff, then it's finally changed. When I'm finished that malacha,
See if he's standing outside. I'm worried about this guy standing outside. Only 1 second.
Turn the camera off?
yeah. Okay, so here we go. So I was explaining that the word malacha that Rabbi Meir uses is very michuvan, very directly applied to this sentence, because here we're saying when they finish shaping that's enough. When you finish doing the real malacha, which is shaping it into a new shape, that's enough. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Who was reading?
I was. Do you want to do it?
I'll take over. Tanya, kli cheres. Kli cheres means there isn't a kli. Eimasai mekabatur.
He's just reviewing
sorry.
the Bryce again.
Should I go further?
Go ahead.
Where's the mekabatur? Shenigma malachta, when his work is completely done. The product, finished product.
Well, not necessarily finished product, because there might be something to do, like put in the kiln, but the malacha has been done. The shaping of it's been done. That's Divrei Rabbi Meir.
In other words, it's called Rabbi Meir. V'shel emem v'sheyatzapa b'chivsha.
That's where Rashi got these words. This is exactly the words that Rashi used before. Remember? Who's the Tana that doesn't need siruf in the Kivshan? Rashi used these exact same words. Rashi's always using the words of the Gemora, trying to get us sensitive to what the Gemora is talking about. So it's Rabbi Yoshua who requires that it goes into a kiln, and only after that is it what?
Fire up.
Then it's what? From that point on, it can be what? No. From that point on, what? Makabel Tuma. Then it can be Makabel Tuma. But before that, it's not Makabel Tuma. Why is it not Makabel Tuma before that, according to Rabbi Yeshua? It's not a finished product. Because just a piece of clay is not a finished product, according to him. Because who's going to use a cup that's made out of this moist clay? Still moist. Okay? So that's going to be the Shita of Rabbi Meir, and therefore he could be the one who wrote our Mishnah, who said even when it's just a moist piece of clay and it hasn't gone into the kiln, it still could be considered a kli. And that's why in our Mishnah he says you can't do it on Yom Tov. But Rabbi Yeshua ostensibly would say it's okay to do it on Yom Tov because it's not a kli. Let's see Rashi. Who's reading the Rashi now? Misha Nigmar Malachto.
Mishanigma Malachto, Chaki Katsa.
The carving out. Rashi says that's what he means. The malacha is finished, meaning the carving out is finished. That's what it means, malacha, in this sense. So Rabbi Meir is saying, as soon as you finish carving out the excess clay, and now it's a proper receptacle in terms of its shape, then it's enough to be called a kli. Rabbi Yeshua says no, only mishi yitzarfo, only from the time that you put it in the kiln to fire it up. Because what happens then, says Rashi, Yechazkein. Bekivsha. Okay.
Strong.
Right. Misha, from the time that Yechazkein, he will strengthen them, meaning the Kalim. Al Yedei Tziruf, by means of the heating process, which happens with the application of the fire. Bekivsha, in the furnace. Now it's interesting, the word mitzaref, remember Rashi used a word before it, sorfei zahav. Rashi talked about the sorfei zahav. What was the sorfei zahav, remember?
Yeah, because the refining of the gold.
Right. And here the same word is really being used in regarding the clay, the wet clay being put into the kiln. Rashi would seem to learn maybe, or maybe just Chazal by using the same wording are kind of implying that the same process occurs in both cases. We don't really think of it that way. But how come it strengthens when you put a kli into a kivshan, it makes it strong? What's happening there that makes it so strong? Yeah, but apparently it's more than that. It's called siruf. Otherwise it would just be called yibush. Drying out is yibush.
It changes the place somehow.
It seems like it gets out impurities. Heating process can get impurities out. That's what happens when you heat up gold to a very high temperature, right? The gold either goes up and the other stuff goes down, or vice versa. That it separates the impurities from the pure. And it's the impurities that makes it not worth a lot of money, right? Gold is impure, not worth a lot. Once you make
it's tarnished, right?
Maybe it'll tarnish. I don't know exactly how it looks, but those who know will understand when it's not yet refined. So when you refine something, you're taking the impurities out through the application of heat, right? I'm thinking if we have a similar thing when we cook things, sometimes that happens as well. That certain things go to the top, other things fall down to the bottom. Anyways, so I think maybe the implication is that that's what happens when you put a wet piece of clay in the oven. It kind of takes out some of the impurities. The water, perhaps, maybe that's considered a bit of it, because water also has chemicals in it. It has minerals, has all sorts of things, especially Israeli water, right? Israeli water is called hard water. It has so many different minerals and stuff in it. But it could be that there's other things that happen when you heat up the clay, maybe not with the water, as the water is being released into the steam, into the air, maybe it takes with it other parts of the clay, which is also a bit of an impurity. So not only you get it dry, but also it's stronger. That's maybe why it's called siruf. That makes sense now why it's called siruf, because it's a similar process.
It's amazing when they made bricks, the Egyptians, they put straw inside.
That's right.
So
It's held it together. That held it together.
Right. Different process.
Yeah. It's a
And
bit
then
different. I know they do the similar thing today when they put like flour in, they say, in a cheesecake. You don't have to make a mazonos because the flour is only there to hold it together. And there's different cases where they use something a bit harder to keep things that are looser together.
Right.
But I'm just thinking perhaps that maybe something happens with that's to explain also why it gets so strong, because otherwise should get hard, not strong. Why the strength? Why does it get stronger when you put it in a kiln?
It's like reinforcement, I guess.
But I'm saying the word here, that's why Hebrew is so amazing. The word lets you in on an extra secret. Right? That word is cluing you in that the same process that we're all comfortable with gold, that by heating up gold, you purify it by separating, by means of that heating process, the impurities from the pure, seemingly by Chazal using the same term to the process that happens in a kiln with the clay, even though most of us wouldn't have thought of it that way, but that is what Chazal are maybe letting us in on, that secret, that happens as well. Maybe to a lesser extent, not as dramatic as the impurities of a gold, but to some extent, that's why we have this incredible. Probably, if we were, I know someone who's a potter. I mean, the truth is they can make incredible things, and the truth is probably if they would just take, I guess the proof would be like this. Well, if I just would take that same clay vase or whatever, instead of putting it in a kiln, I would just leave it on the windowsill for a month and let it dry out thoroughly. So after a month, it really dried out. It's properly dry. There's no real moisture in there anymore, but it will not be strong.
You stick the dust.
Yeah. I guess that's what they're saying. The heat. How does the heat actually strengthen it up? It's strengthened up by forcing out, together with the water that's being released, at the same moment impurities are being released, and that's what makes it stronger. That could be part of the. I'm just theorizing.
I just a really interesting thing about when Asaph asked his father how you tied straw and salt. How they tied the two together. That straw by itself is useless. It has no value whatsoever. You add it to a brick, it now has value. Right? So there is value to straw, but only when it's used with bricks. And the same with salt. If you have a salad or you have something, just by itself, it's used. No one will pay for that. But if you put salt in it, well, it becomes a real salad.
Makes it something, yeah.
So now he's actually asking a different kind of a question.
Something that by itself is nothing.
Yeah, but
if you add it to other things and has a value, will that require?
It wasn't such a stupid question.
Right.
So it wasn't very interesting.
Well, that makes sense. That makes sense, because the Chazal always say that people who appear to us to be silly characters, because basically that's how teachers teach it on very young and to very young children, and it's kind of a shame because then as we grow up, we still think of them as these silly caricatures of people. But the Chazal say in a number of places, the Torah will never deal with silly people, with stupid people, because that's not even interesting, right? What's interesting is that there was someone who was a bit of a genius, and we still got around it. A Paro who was a genius guy.
And this guy was terrible, but he was saying interesting things. Right?
Exactly. That's why his head, they say, went into Mars Makpela. Because his head was actually HaKodesh. Just didn't let it affect the rest of his body, unfortunately. Okay, so we finish that Rashi.
Yep.
No. We're still on the Rashi Misha Yitzarfa. So Rashi just explained what happens when you put it in the kivshan. It strengthens it.
Sheyachsam aidei tziruf ha'or b'kivshan comes strengthened through the heating process in the oven. Mitzvah b'lashon chachamim
L'chazek
u'makashe
u'makshe kli cheres. It's one of the words they use to describe the process of hardening and strengthening a pottery, a kli made of pottery.
דבר המחזיק בין יד במים בין באור, moves through the hand or water and fire.
I'm sorry, the kli matchos. There's an extra letter that's missing there. That's why there's an apostrophe over the vav. There's a tav that's missing. The real word should have a tav at the end.
Why do they leave it out?
Just for printing's sake, I think. I doubt Rashi himself did it. But the printer saw over here he could get all the words on if he just left that one letter off. So that's an old trick, is to put an apostrophe over a letter if you're leaving out a few extra letters to show that it's basically abbreviated.
What's it mean?
Matches, matechet. You probably heard of the word matechet, metal. Matechet is metal. So kli matches means a metal kli. So till now Rashi was talking about kalim, utensils that are made out of pottery. And this is the term that's used for putting them and strengthening them to the point where they're strong enough to use on a long-term basis. What about a kli that's made out of matches, that's made out of metal?
דבר המחזיקים ביד.
You don't read those kind of parentheses, by the way. If it's roundish, you don't read it. It's someone's deciding to be left out, and the square ones we do read.
Whether it's through fire or whether it's through water. Water and fire, right?
I'm not sure if they work together or separately. I think sometimes they take the metal things and they put them in fire, and then at the very end they put them in water. That hardens up metal kalim. I think it's my thing here. Sorry. Nothing that important. Okay, so for some reason it's not clear in Rashi why he decides to switch to talking about metal kalim. This Beitsa started out by saying that they're only talking about kalim that are made out of clay. So why Rashi has to switch at the end? It seems like he's just being thorough. For the sake of thoroughness, he said, if it's some kind of a pottery vessel, then the way you harden it, the way you make it a final and hard product is to put it in a kiln. But if it's a metal one, there's a slightly different way of making it sort of hardened and durable. Right? It will be durable. Okay. In the meantime, that's the Gemora, right? The Gemora asked a very simple question. Who is the author of our Mishnah? What does that mean? Who's the one who would consider wet, a kli that's still wet, clay, to be a real kli, and therefore the Mishnah said you can't do it on Yom Tov. The Gemora says it's Rabbi Meir, who regarding Tuma says that you can't, that from that point on, as soon as it's made into the shape of a kli, even before you fire it up in a furnace, it's still called enough of a kli to be makabel tuma, so he would say the same thing over by us, that it would also be called a nair even before you put it in the kiln. Therefore you can't do it on Yom Tov. But now we go back to the Gemora, and the Gemora has a kasha from Abaye. And this is often what happened, is Rabbi Yosef said something, and Abaye was his Talmud, right? Abaye had two Rebbeim, right? Rabbah, who was more like his foster father as well as his Rebbe for his earlier part of his life. And then actually Rav Yosef, who was to some extent an opponent of Rabbah for many halachas. Rabbah and Rav Yosef argue on many things. Rav Yosef became Abaye's Rebbe in probably his latter half of his life. So you find a lot of things that he was telling his Rebbe, who was Rav Yosef, but he was basically arguing, right? Like a good Talmud. But he did the same thing with Rabbah, don't worry. Okay, so he said to his Rebbe, Rav Yosef, what? Amalei Abaye, who's reading? Let's just say Mimai.
From what?
Meaning, from what is your proof? From what do you really have a proof over here? Now, what does he mean? How do you have a proof that from this, what Rabbi Meir is saying here, would prove that he's the author of our Mishnah? as if it's the same exact subject. Because I could say,
Yomar Khan, up until this point, Lo Kamar Rav Meir,
Hasam,
Hasam.
Ella. So I choose to read these kind of statements. Lo, Ka'amar, Ella.
He only said.
Maybe he only said his shita, his famous shita, that something's not, still a kli without going to the kiln over there. Only Hassan. Why? Why over there would it be more applicable in the case of the Tosefta of Kalim? Midi.
Because it is suitable to hold things,
Right.
certain things.
You can hold things in that, even though it's still not fired up in a kiln, it still could be used as a receptacle to hold a bunch of other things. So it has a proper usage. As soon as it has a proper usage, it becomes a kli enough to be makabel tuma. But what? Hacha.
Although, but
here regarding this small nair, right? Like we have these little shot glasses for our menorah, this tiny little container. Rashi stresses that because here we're talking about this tiny little container.
because
No, limai, not lama, but
Oh.
limai. For what?
For what? Chazi. What is it suitable to hold?
Right. We don't really imagine such a small thing as suitable to hold anything of value, because while it's wet, Rashi adds, we're going to see hopefully this in Rashi, it's really not suitable to hold anything liquid because it'll just dissolve the wet clay. Right? You put something liquidy in already something that's like mud basically, it'll just dissolve it. Right? So it can't be used for the shemen yet. So what else are you going to use it for? It's just a tiny little nothing. So he says, no, there is something. So this could be Reb Yosef answering. The answer is, it could be used what? L'kibule day shiti.
To hold these little coins.
To hold little pieces of metal or little coins, tiny little piece of coins or piece of metal, that could be put in a small little shot glass type of thing, and then that would be a good place to store them until you need them. Okay, let's see the Rashis here. The whole problem that Abaye was bringing up that Rav Yosef answers, but let's see how Rashi presents.
Where do we know the Svir later of
What is it?
The first word in the line is umi mai.
Yeah, I've got that. The Rosh text.
Desvirle, that he holds. And then it repeats le Remeir. It's held to Rebbe Meir, meaning Rebbe Meir holds.
Kshar Kli Cheres.
The Nair, he holds about Nair, he holds its ki shar kli cheres. Right? Over there he talked about a kli cheres. And here he's talking about, whoever's talking here is talking about a Nair. If you say it's Rebbe Meir, you're saying he holds the same thing about a Nair as all the other kli cheres. How do you know that's true? From where are you getting that it's going to be the same halacha? Because Bishlema. Oh, that's how Rashi learns. Over there, where Rebbe Meir talked about kli cheres and said they're a kli before you fire them up in the furnace. You know why? Because they are big, right? Like he assumes a regular kli cheres is like a plate, a pot, something that's big.
That's how you know how to do it.
Therefore, even before it goes into the kiln, it still has some good usage. Therefore, what?
I'm ruined Lamayim. Not free for water.
Even if they're not fit for water or wine, uladavar lach. That's how Rashi's learning. Before you put it in the kiln, you know what's not going to be good to put in these kalim? Anything liquid. Right? If this kli was still made out of wet clay, you know what I shouldn't put in here? Coffee, Coca-Cola, anything liquid would be a mistake to put in here. Why? Because Mimachan.
Mimachan.
Mimachan. Mimameach. Mimameach. Right? From the word nimuach. You know what the word nimuach means? To dissolve.
Dissolve.
So mimachan, it means it dissolves them. Anything liquid inside of one of these keli, which is still wet clay, which is basically wet mud, you put something liquid inside there, it's mimachan. It's going to end up dissolving them. Right? It might not happen right away, but basically it tends to dissolve this substance which is still wet. So that's what Rashi says, that even though these are things which are not fit for putting liquid inside of them, but still, chazumihu.
Davar yavish.
Chazumihu.
They have a foot.
They are fit, however, in other words, however, even though they're not good for liquids at this point, but they're still fit for what?
Yavish, for something dry.
A davar yavish, a dry thing, right? Anything dry. What kind of example?
Pears, fruit.
Like fruit, right? You have a bowl. I wouldn't want to put in that bowl anything wet because it'll dissolve it, but I could put something hard in it that won't dissolve it. In the meantime, that'll be okay. So that's what Rashi says. Abaye's point is that over there, when Rabbi Meir says that before he put in the kiln, it could be makabel to him because it's already a kli, because it has a usage. Not its complete usage, mind you. The complete usage is for wet things as well, and that you can't do yet. But you could still use it for dry things. But that's what he wants to say. That's okay over there where you're talking about larger keli. But over here, aval ner. But here we're talking about a ner. And our mission is talking about a ner that he gouged out the clay, and now it's just a wet piece of clay that looks like a cup. It's what? It's katanu.
Small.
It's much smaller. So even though our Gemora never said such a thing, but Rashi's learning that the difference between over there and over here is because over there is big, and you can still put dry things in it, and over here it's small, so what are you going to put in it? Very interesting. Rashi's way of learning. This is completely Rashi's brainchild, as it were. Rashi puts this in completely on his own. Could be someone else who explained it that way, but this is something that's completely not in our Gemora, but it explains our Gemora very nicely, what the difference is. And what? Because it's so small, Mil say,
it's not fitting for
key.
When.
That's right. Even when, in other words, even when it's not fit for its own normal matter, what's the normal matter for a ner? Putting shemen in it? Yeah. So we said over there, when you can't put in liquid, you can put in dry. But over here, you can't put in its normal thing, which would be shemen. L'may chazi. So what are you going to put in this tiny little thing? You can't put an orange in there, it won't fit.
What's it fit for?
Oh.
Mishani chazi l'kabel pishti. Answers it's fit for.
Right. And Raja didn't even explain that. It's very interesting. He just assumes we know what pshiti are. Thank God I remembered. Oh, let's see how they explain it here in the Sensino Pshiti. Coins. He says copper coins. He learns Pshiti to be copper coins. Anyhow, okay. So we got out of that problem, right? But now the Gemara is in Ika Da'amri. Ika Da'amri should mean what? A similar style of what? Question and answer. So theoretically we should see the Gemara asking who's the author of our Mishnah, or I might skip that part, and then we'd have an answer perhaps of someone else, but then we'd have again Abaye asking a question. So it could be still Rav Yosef giving the answer and Abaye asking a question on his Rebbe.
Yeah.
But instead of saying it's Rabbi Meir, which uses that whole way of thinking, that we found by the case of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yeshua, it might be used another set of Tanoim. But still the same style, so therefore it's called an Ikut Amri. Another version of the same. So it skips over the question apparently, so we have to interject the question. What will be the question? Who's the author of our Mishnah? Right?
Amar Rav Yosef, Rav Eliezer, Bar Rav Tzedok. That's who it is.
Our Mishnah is authored by Rabbi Eliezer Bar Rav Tzedok. Where do we find him? We actually find him in an actual Mishnah.
The Mishnah.
It's not. We learn the Mishnah in Idios. Ilfasim. Those are big serving platters. Charonios. Now those Charonios ones, Rashi says these are made by people who live in the cities, but actually not the metropolis type of cities, smaller cities, and therefore they're not makpid to have such nice kalim. It's kind of like they're a little bit crude out in the outlying regions or whatever, right? In the outback.
Koroniot is outback?
No, I'm not sure. Look, there is a word chorin. B'nai chorin are free people, like we say in the Pesach Seder, B'nai chorin. But often it meant noble people as well. That's just free, but it could mean like people who live off in in the freer cities. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how it translates.
It says here the Kryos. Rashi says.
The what?
The Kryos.
Where do you get that?
Ka'ariot.
Where are you reading from?
Here.
Ilfasin Charonios?
Yeah.
The first will come on Ka'aros. Those are plates.
Karos is not.
Shel B'nei Ayaros. They're from the people who live in cities. But Rashi adds right away, these are not regular cities like you and I would call New York City a city. But no, these are not. She'enan B'nei Krachim, Gedolim. They're not part of a big city. A krach is a real big city.
Is it like folders?
Huh?
Folders. Krach?
Folders.
Folders.
Lichro can mean to wrap things around, so it could be because there's a big wall that goes around them, or because there's a lot of in the city. There's a lot of things that are like different things that are different buildings that are wrapped around other buildings. I don't know. Big city's called a krach. So krach and gedolim are bigger. Ayaros are smaller apparently. There's even kafarim which are even smaller than that. So we're not talking about mamish tiny villages. You're just really comparing, I guess, small cities that are sort of out in the outlying regions rather than the big metropolis. Okay, so if you think like a smallish city, but it's still a city, but it's a smallish city as opposed to a metropolis. Basically what he's trying to say is, like he says at the Hemshech, that they don't use ornate things. They don't have to have a plate that looks so beautiful. They're like more down-to-earth type of people. Whereas people live in the big hotsy-totsy, people live in Manhattan, right? They wouldn't be able to serve you lunch if it wasn't on a special china or something. But these are simple plates, Rashi says, and therefore, Rashi says, you could even have people eating on much simpler plates out there than you would have in the city. All right, well, we'll have to get to it. Maybe we'll start with this tomorrow.